Hey there everyone, and welcome to more RPG horror stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a dungeon master that railroads her players in order to get her drunk husband into their Dungeons & Dragons campaign. A story about a dungeon master that uses a DMPC to TPK a party, and much more. But before we get into that, I have to say that liking these videos and leaving comments really does help the channel out. So it would be awesome if you did so. Plus, it makes Nipsey extremely happy.
Yes, it makes me really happy. I really like this toy.
See? But with that said, let's dive into some D&D horror stories. Bob is the best. He's better than your character. By Reddit user Stray Lion. This story happened in 2020-ish. Great time for online tabletop RPGs. It was a Pathfinder game with me, 2 other players, and the Dungeon Master. For clarity, I'm playing a human battle oracle. We have a gnome rogue and a dwarf barbarian. The group had a good dynamic, but the Dungeon Master was kind of weird, telling us way too much about her husbands, and her cat's bodily functions, while insisting that she played loud music in the background. If you turned her down just right, you could almost get rid of the sound of her awful R&B. But anyway, the story isn't about her and her insistence on talking about her husband's farts. Our group is gathered together under the hook that there's a cultist invasion in town, where people are trying to kidnap townies to sacrifice them to their god, effing Big Bad Tiamat. So all of us find the motivation to hunt down this cult and put the hurt on them. But we get to one chapter where the Dungeon Master just decides to put all of her former players' OCs into the mix. She regales us in game about Bob, a super charming, quote, "you fell in love with him before you ever met him," stupid half-orc barbarian who saved the whole world from evil gods. Bob is her husband's old character. And needless to say, when she was talking about Bob, he was in the room, petting his farting cat. Man, this dungeon master is just surrounded by farts, huh? The person telling us this is a druid who served alongside Bob in a party of adventurers. We never needed to meet the druid, but the druid just so happens to be following our adventure path, almost exactly, for no reason. So they tell us all about Bob, and how cool Bob is, and how Bob mooned the god of evil before beating him up like a school bully. Her husband laughed loudly in the background. Everything was Bob this and Bob that, trying to build up the character. Eventually, we get to a town that has erected a brass statue of Bob and is holding a festival to celebrate Bob. At no point had any of us cared or asked who Bob was. This was just a massive lore dump that only amounted to, quote, "Bob is better than all of you, and Bob is the best." And so we're like, that's cool, we're gonna dip. But then the DM said, "You know, there's gonna be mythic loot here, right?" Completely out of character. So we're like, okay, guess we can stay a little. We were forced to participate in the celebration for 3 entire campaign sessions. During the celebration, the dwarf was given a Vorpal Great Axe and adamantine armor. I was given 2 free feats and a 3 level boost, making me a higher level than everyone else. And the gnome got a literal mountain of gold. We were level 4. Imagine this, the Dungeon Master, who is new to Pathfinder, throws a random encounter at us. A group of aggressive kobolds worshipping an evil deity that was not Tiamat. What she quickly realized is that a level 7 battle oracle in a previously level 4 party makes things hard to balance. I do what my class does and bully Maguire them, while the well-equipped dwarf proves that she was already more than a match for them. Meanwhile, the gnome sneak attacks from a tree vantage point whenever he isn't counting his money. So from the fight, we naturally have gained 3 kobold pets, which we named after different cereals, as you do. Mine was Captain Crunch. The Dungeon Master was visibly upset that a gaggle of stinky kobolds in the woods proved to be no match for a level 7 oracle and a dwarf with a +5 weapon, so she ups the ante in the following session. We are just walking along the road when, click click, random encounter time. 4 gargoyles with 2 araignées commanding them. What the hell are 2 araignées doing here, in the middle of the road, on an effing Sunday? Dwarf immediately decapitates one of the araignées in one turn. Vorpal don't discriminate. The Dungeon Master seethes in full view, probably reconsidering giving the dwarf the axe. Meanwhile, I'm smashing some gargoyles. I don't get any one-hitters, but they're not going to be good after this fight. One hits me, and I immediately overheal its damage. The fight is looking like a wash, but suddenly, our gnome rogue was grabbed by one of the other araignées and was carried off, with no save or roll involved. It just snatches and dashes. She says, quote, "Vengeance for our lord will be mine." Who? The headless araigné's corpse is wearing a holy symbol of an evil god. We eventually identify it as a god of decay and death. The druid just so happens to be walking through seconds later, telling us, "The tree said you were in danger," and then gives us a huge lore dump. The druid tells us that this was the evil god that Bob mooned and beat up, that we need to find Bob if we're to have a hope of rescuing the gnome. We had never met Bob. We had no reason to want to meet Bob. But now, our gnome was somewhere in hell or something, completely separated from the group. And we had to find Bob, who was going to save our gnome, because, quote, "Bob is the only one who can do it." Our gnome spent one entire campaign session doing literally nothing, while we spent time looking for Bob. Mind you, our story hook had been completely swept under the rug. Remember the Tiamat thing? That whole impending apocalypse? Nah, we gotta find Bob, who's off somewhere else, with no clues. The druid, despite having only great things to say about their time with Bob, and having preternatural senses via the wilds, has no idea where Bob is. So we just look around, asking, "Have you seen Bob?" Everyone knows who he is and how great he is, but nobody has seen him. The gnome asks where he is, and the Dungeon Master says, "You're in a cage, and the world around you is dark." And that's it. So the gnome says, "I have dark vision, what do I see?" And the Dungeon Master responds with, "Nothing. There's nobody, just a cage." The session ends with no path forward, and with the gnome locked off in some place that doesn't exist, for 3 hours of top-notch gameplay. The next session day rolled around, and Dungeon Master says that her husband was going to be joining us, and that he was excited to play Bob again. Her husband comes onto the stream alongside her, a man who is pathetically drunk, belching as soon as he's on camera, but it's one of those bubbly ones, where he sounds like he's gonna be sick. We're not 15 minutes into this session, and her husband keels over and vomits into an aluminum waste bin. After this, Gnome just leaves, and Dwarf and I were soon to follow. We decided that that was enough of that mess, and just put it behind us. I wasn't really friends with either of the other players, so Gnome just kinda went his own way. I kept Dwarf Player on, as I went on to make a campaign myself, which went much better for how long it lasted. But it might warrant a slightly tamer story here. Man, what a confusing course of events. OP did state that it was the Dungeon Master's first time running a Pathfinder game, so the unbalancing of some of the stuff can be forgiven, as it sounds like she was learning as she went. But to then derail the entire plot, just so she could introduce her husband's old character, to the point of taking one player out of the game without any type of saving throws or rolls, is a bit much. Then, when the time comes to introduce Bob, her husband is apparently way too drunk to play already and throws up in front of everyone on the call. I don't blame OP and the other players for calling that game a wash and just dipping out after that. Though I think they should have informed the Dungeon Master as to the reasons why they were doing so that perhaps she could learn from this disaster of a game. Though I do have to say, there is some comical tones to having a mythical warrior in the world that is just simply named Bob. I think that maybe the Dungeon Master could have done what she was going for, if only she thought it through a bit more, and intertwined the Bob character in a less forceful manner. That, and not having her husband be drunk for his introduction. Though, what are your thoughts on this one? Let's move on. Masculine Frustration Toxicity by Reddit user Seminarium Lord. So, not super dramatic, just wanted to vent because I find this frustrating. It might be on me for not giving enough hints, but that's for the comments. So, I've been playing with this Dungeon Master for roughly a year and a half, and we recently started a new campaign. I say recently, though it's been about 4 months. We had a session where me and another fighter had a duel, and due to a misunderstanding of the rules, they used magic to make my character blind. Due to a low con score, I was never able to shrug it off, and had disadvantage the entire fight. After never rolling above a 10, my character lost the fight, which was fine. My character, who had been the tank of the party and tried to be the quote gruff tough guy, was a bit off afterwards and put it to the magic messing him up, so they had something to work on. The player, who I think meted a little, that's my opinion, sensed my frustration above character at the continuous low rolls. They insisted that there was something wrong in game, to which my character continuously denied. After the session had ended, I thought that was the end of it. But we do out-of-game play-by-post, so that some emotional and story-driving roleplay can happen out of session if they go on too long. The player then goes and talks to another player in the play-by-post, continuing that my character must have masculinity issues, and how we might not be sure that they are right for the party. I kept my mouth shut, as it's not my play-by-post, but I feel a bit targeted at something that I was frustrated about above the game. But the player wouldn't let it go, despite my attempts to make it obvious that the character has no issues, that it was me personally. Am I in the wrong for getting a bit miffed at this? Or is it perfectly acceptable that they continue this? There is a very simple solution to all of this. Simply talk to the player and tell him that you saw his play-by-post with the other character about your character, and explain as clearly as you can that the frustration that he was seeing during and after the duel wasn't your character, but you as a player for getting low rolls. Trust me, we've all been there, just having a night where none of the rolls are in your favor, and it can be a bit frustrating. I think that just simply telling the player this is the best course of action, and if they are understanding, they can always retcon that roleplay conversation that he had with the other character. Remember, communication is key in tabletop RPGs, and I think it is in dire need here. On to the next one. Game Master is fair and unbiased during PvP by Reddit user PureGiraffe2081. I was playing with this group for 3 years, in the same universe as another group by the same Game Master. 2 groups, sometimes affecting each other in universe, and at the end was supposed to be the big conflict between the 2 groups. Of note, my party is arguably the more, quote, evil one. We've done some bad things, and we generally go our own way, which does set us up for this final conflict with the, quote, good group. Also, there's some strange homebrew items in our party, specifically a coat that allows us to merge into one, each taking our own turns inside the body, moving and taking actions, taking the greatest of the AC and saving throws. So, like a Dungeons & Dragons version of Ultron? At this final session, we're hanging out in the town that we're building, when the big bad, the Game Master controlled NPC, appears with the other group. So it's us versus the other party, and the GM's NPC. Also with the other party are 4 wizards that surround the battle arena, holding a shield up to prevent any of our allies from getting in. Notably, the Dungeon Master would frequently use these NPC wizards to cast Counterspell at 9th level for the benefit of the other party. We kill their cleric, and the Game Master jumps in to decide that when one of us dies, they get a legendary action to do one thing, and he mass heals his party. Okay, fine. They kill one of us, and she heals us as well. During the fight, in a critical moment where an athletics check would decide if we lost, the Game Master decided to allow the other party to use their inspirations to make us reroll the check. This has no precedent in the campaign, as we've never used inspirations offensively. We rolled well enough anyway to win about 4 rerolls, as the other party used their inspirations on our athletics checks. And then, the Game Master said that he had been keeping track of the joke inspirations that we had awarded him throughout the campaign, and he started using his quote inspirations to make us reroll. So the Game Master is explicitly making us reroll using his inspirations to try to kill our party, but we survive anyway. So then, we finally gain an advantage, revivifying one of our dead party members and polymorphing her to keep her alive. This was not counterspelled because the wizards had used their reactions. At the top of the next round, the Game Master tells us that a ring on the dead cleric's finger starts glowing. The Game Master controlled NPC Big Bad, who is at the top of initiative, then retrieves the ring and reveals to us that it is a ring of 3 wishes, which recharges every 100 years, which just conveniently elapsed just now. He, the Game Master, then uses the ring to wish for our party to be dead. After that, the Game Master and the other party gleefully describe how they used the other wishes to undo all of the things that we've done over 3 real-life years in this campaign. Game Master swears up and down that he was completely unbiased, and it could have gone either way. Unbiased? Are you kidding me? To have a DMPC join up with the other party that was essentially OP's party's BBEG, and then have 4 extra wizards casting Counterspell each time one of OP's party members would try to cast something, definitely shows some blatant favoritism, as that put OP's party at a great disadvantage. Then to have the other party be able to use their inspirations to make OP's party reroll was even more BS. But the icing on this favoritism cake is the Deus Ex Machina Ring of Wishing that just so happened to recharge just as OP's party was starting to gain some footing. That just tells me that the Dungeon Master had it in his mind that OP's party was going to lose from the start, and when it looked like things may not go that way, just pulled stuff out of his behind to make it happen the way he wanted it to. Then, to add insult to injury, they used the other wishes to make it that everything OP's party did in the world became undone, like they never existed. I would be a bit peeved at that too, and when the DM said that he was being unbiased and it could have gone either way, I would have responded that I'm going my own way, away from playing in any of your games again. 3 years of playtime only for that to happen. That really sucks. Hopefully, OP will be able to find a better game to play in with a better Dungeon Master. Let's move on. Player fetishizes, stereotypes, and simps for my character because she's a buff lady, not caring that the person playing her was a minor, because he was really desperate for board game sex. By Reddit user, Expert Individual 185. My character, Sif, is a character I was always nervous about using in public games, since I'm a teenage boy playing a tough lady who could definitely be described as a dommy-mommy type. This character was written as a side character in a campaign I wrote, and she was originally a man, but I gender swapped her because I needed more women characters in the campaign. Anyway, I'm not going into detail on the campaign I was playing, because it's not important to the context of this horror story. But there was this one insufferable player that acted like a total creep. He, for some reason, really wanted to get in bed with my character, or specifically, really wanted to be essayed by her. As a person whose stepmom was an SA victim as a child, rest in peace, miss you mom, this really rubbed me the wrong way. But the way he tried to entice me into effing him were really cringy and uncomfortable. He carried all of her stuff, he took off his shirt a lot, he bent over in front of her, and took hits for her. Keep in mind that I was a minor who has never done a fade to black scene ever. He ended up just straight asking for sex, and she shot him down. He immediately decided that this means that my character was a lesbian, because he has high charisma, and all strong women are inherently lesbians. She isn't. She just doesn't want to have sex because she's still mourning her murdered husband. The Dungeon Master had enough, saying that he could either stop trying to initiate a fade to black scene with a character played by a minor, or he could leave the table. He chose the latter, as he wasn't going to get his board game sex here. In the end, I feel like we were both at fault, him being a creep, and me for not checking what kind of people I was playing with before I used this character. I really love this character, being the super badass mom of the group, and don't want to stop using her. What should I do? Well, first off, condolences for your stepmom. And no, OP did nothing wrong here. Though I will say that, if that player simping for OP's character was making OP uncomfortable, then he should have said so above table, and that could have fixed the problem right there, with the creepy player either stopping it or just leaving. And as far as what OP should do now, just keep playing the character you want to play, as it sounds like the problem player went looking for his horny roleplay elsewhere. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you who enjoy my videos, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.